All these things sort of don't mean a lot to most people, and that's okay. I'm not asking for everybody to think it's important. I'm just going to present the story in a way that feels like the 5% of people who it was that important to are really going to appreciate this.
Welcome to Church Jams Now, the podcast where three former youth group kids and current music nerds deep dive into Christian music from the 90s and 2000s. I, of course, am your co-host, Kylan Savage. Unfortunately, TJ Smith is not here with us, but I do have beautiful producer Josh Olson.
Hey, Kylan, how's it going?
It is going. We have a very special guest today. Once again, this is always so weird, where we have to pretend like we haven't been talking for the last 15 minutes. But we have... From Unoriginal Vinyl, we have Jason Zymet. Jason, how are you doing today?
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me on, you guys. Can't wait to chat with you about anything you want to know. All the deep, dirty, grimy, seedy underbelly of Unoriginal. Is that how you say it? Unoriginal Vinyl?
Unoriginal.
Yeah. That's for sure. That's the reason we brought you on. I'm glad.
For sure. I mean, we're basically the TMZ of Christian and Christian adjacent music. So we're here to get some gotchas on you. But besides that, we're very excited for you to be here.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
I want to get into Unoriginal Vinyl and what it is for people that maybe don't know what it is that you do, and then I want to go into origin story. But first, I want to talk about why we have you on today in the first place, and what's your involvement in the sort of larger quote unquote Christian music scene.
Yes. So Unoriginal Vinyl is a graphic design services company that specializes in particularly restoration of classic album packaging or storytelling from artists who don't have a platform or perhaps are disengaged with the social media environment, but would like to have their stories told in a manner that seeks for clarification or perhaps some sort of gratitude towards its fan base as the years go on. And oftentimes we find the best way to do that is through big album packaging, album restoration, and seeking out folks that were involved in different aspects of the album's production, perhaps separate from the music itself. So whether or not that's telling the story of the producer or the graphic designers who were originally involved, we tend to be neutral in the world of record labels versus artists. So we're sort of Switzerland in all of it. We don't have a commerce or fulfillment side to our business. We focus on front end packaging, working with pressing plants to make sure that the albums are going to be the best quality that they can possibly be. And we also do other things like produce movies that have to do with this scene. So we're recently elated to have been involved in the Squad 5-0 is Here to Stay documentary.
Yeah. I know Caleb. We've been trying to get him on the show too. So that's cool that y'all are involved in that.
Yeah, just anything that sort of has adjacencies to this world, and then even now beyond the world of just Christian music and in the world of the greater artists who are seeking help from somebody who is informed on brand and informed on packaging and informed on good presentations and maybe marketing campaigns. So we do a lot of things for record labels that have to do with good looking mock-ups and partner with them for just making sure that all of the pre-built assets are going to be as sharp as possible. And I have a lot of history with just working for cool brands in the consumer packaged goods space. So this Unoriginal Vinyl whole entire enterprise is just something I do as a hobby in my spare time.
That's so cool. I do have a question. Has anyone ever compared Unoriginal Vinyl to like Criterion? Because that's what you guys remind me of.
No, but I appreciate that. Definitely. I think it's like, to that point, it's definitely meant to be the somewhat academic, somewhat artsy, somewhat Sotheby's,
with
high-end.
Super cool packaging and design, and bringing these sort of older releases into like a new era in a way that like makes it worth it, I think, for everybody, for fans and for artists.
I think when we started, the idea, like Criterion, was super niche, super specific audience. There's another brand here in Colorado that started around the same time we started called Vinyl Me Please. And similar ethos where it was like, let's get really, really deep in the well on curating people's vinyl collections for them and representing every time a logo is on the back of a jacket of an album that you're familiar with, but you see the extra logo next to it, you say, oh, it's the best version of that thing that there can be.
Right. Yeah.
So similar idea.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So when we do have people on the show, I'm always fascinated by origin stories. So I'd like to get into yours. And what I mean by that is like, so our show is very specifically about Christian and Christian adjacent music from the 90s and 2000s because that was sort of, the music we were raised on. And I'm always interested in how people got into that. And then also just like what kind of music you grew up listening to. What was the first CD you bought? Like how did you get from a tiny little baby boy to where you are now?
The Reader's Digest version of that goes something like establishing my own taste in music. And I think for most people, depending on what kind of parent situation they have, begins around the third grade where you start to develop a fascination with your own favorite song. And it has less to do with a TV theme song out of a cartoon on a Saturday morning that you liked and more to do with, for me, just too much exposure to MTV way too early. So this was the early 90s when watching a Boyz II Men video and followed by a Pearl Jam video and followed by MTV's The State was very commonplace for me. Yeah. And by the time it got to middle school and by the time 1994 had sort of introduced the idea of a radio-friendly version of punk rock, I was disproportionately fascinated in Green Day, disproportionately fascinated in the Epitaph records of it all, the NoFX, but I wanted something that I felt okay listening to around my parents. So NoFX, punk and Drublick. Back in those days, you had resources that weren't the internet, like the public library to rent CDs, or for me, it was Blockbuster Music. You could go and open any CD at all, or even the Christian bookstores had this demo wall of cassettes.
Oh, I remember that. CDs. That was the best.
You just get like a little Sony Walkman, put it on your headphones, and I would spend probably 3 hours after every day of school at the Christian bookstore listening to absolutely everything. And I didn't care if it looked cool or not. So it was like an All-Star United demos tape or a Small Town Poets or a Third Day or a 90 Pound Wuss or a Focused or a Overcome record. I just wanted to consume as much media as I could. I also had like a guy at the local Camelot Music, which was part of like the Sam Goody chain sort of thing, who would do dime outs for me. So he was like my shepherd. He was maybe 19 and would destroy all the records he thought on CD that I should check out. And so that was much more of an introduction to like...
Wow, I love that.
That's a hookup right there.
The older brother version of like, oh, if you like Green Day, have you ever heard Descendants? Have you ever heard some of the influencers, Stiff Little Fingers, things like that you might not be familiar with? And I would thus introduce him to the Christian bookstore cousins, like oftentimes step cousins, oftentimes inbred cousins of these superior sounding records. But it was kind of a mutual admiration society for the scene that my parents felt good about me growing up in, which was youth group culture. And the youth group leaders, I was often the ones informing them about what CDs to buy. So they'd have a little budget at the church, and then they'd have like a $250 budget. And a smart youth group leader would let the kid in that scenario lead the task of curating the music collection for youth group, which I was always the guy who would raise my hand and say, I want a MXPX tape. I want a Value Pack tape. I want a 5-Iron Frenzy tape. And growing up in Colorado, you had this just deluge of music appreciation that looked very different than maybe an urban environment. So it was much more, I grew up in Boulder, Colorado. So that was much more about hippie culture, a bunch of communal togetherness, people who just believed that the rising tide raises all ships in a love of music. So it didn't matter if it was like jam bandy fish kind of music, or if it was punk rock, or if it was jazz fusion. It was all in the same gumbo called let's get this kid exposure to as much music as possible. And that led me to going to a lot of concerts, probably at a very too young age. So MXPX, 90 Pound Wuss and Value Pack was my first punk rock show. In 1996, I was 12. I saw people shooting up heroin in the street leading into the youth group show as we thought it was going to be. You know what I mean? So there's like this kind of contrast there of realizing that punk rock sort of crosses borders and boundaries. It isn't just for youth group kids. It's for hardcore street kids as well. And Fiverr and Frenzy was also one of those bands locally who helped champion the cause of, quite frankly, the impoverished and the homeless and the welcoming together of all different types of kids. So especially misfit kids. And honestly, a youth group kid from the suburbs showing up to a punk rock show wearing his, like, I don't know, Walmart t-shirt that he got and his Adidas shorts or his Umbros.
Right. Oh, yeah.
That kid is also a misfit in and amongst the ska punk culture.
Right.
So we're all kind of not nerds, but we're just sort of all the people who don't quite fit the the regular narrative of what it would mean to be a popular high schooler or a middle schooler.
I love that.
That led me to here.
That's so cool.
Nice. We normally talk about ask people like what for their first like CD or something they bought that brought them into music. I'm curious for you because with Unoriginal Vinyl, the physical package is such a big deal, and I'm curious if you what was it like that was a marking moment for you, like when you were young, that you're like, oh, I love how this package was created, or like you would just spend time flipping through booklet. I mean, like you spent a lot of time obviously listening to physical media because you had to, but I was like, if you had any certain moments that you're like, I want the things that I make as you are when you started doing unoriginal vinyl to give me the feeling of these records or whatever.
So when you had CD booklets when you were coming up and you brought them with you in the car to listen through and make your own mixtapes, or even before that, it was cassette mixtapes and stuff like that, how important was it to you that you had the CD booklet with the CD inside your binder versus not? Answer each of you that question.
Well, I know Josh's answer. Josh is our big physical media guy. For me, I've gone back and forth. Like I have periods of time in my life where I'm like, okay, I need all of this to like stay together. Then you have those periods where it's just like, oh, I'm going to throw everything away but the actual CD, and then you regret it later. Then you have to buy them again later. I fully go through that cycle. Like every couple
I remember
years.
You did that. You and Joe did that one time, and I was like, why are you throwing this away, guys? Like,
I know. Yeah, it's very important to Josh.
I didn't have the booklet with me though. I was like, I would keep that in my case at home and just have the CDs there, but then spend time going through it.
I was definitely the full Monty, not just the booklet, but the back tray inside with the track listing. All of it had to be in my booklets. So my booklets were a regular booklet of like 200 CDs would be like this. Mine were like easily double the width, because as I was sitting on long road trips when I was growing up, didn't do a lot of flying at all. We do a road trip every single year down to Mission, Texas, and spend a month down there. So that's McAllen. Rio Grande Valley. From Denver to Rio Grande Valley is a 21-hour drive.
Yeah,
and
that's long.
I would want something to digest and consume along with the music so that I could make a conscious connection to the artist and know every band member's name, know what they played, know that when they came to town, I would go up and introduce myself to the bass player named Nick, instead of somebody in the youth group who was just like Mike Herrera. Well, he's a bad example because he's a bass player, but you know what I'm saying? Like, not the lead singer. I would always sort of find the back door by way of learning about the artist through the packaging, and even the people who were, burned CDs or something like that. I would go the extra mile and make all of the liner notes myself. If I couldn't find them, I would go.
That's the next level.
I would draw my own versions of the covers to the albums as the cassettes would come across, or as I would find something that maybe felt kind of, I don't know, like scandalized if maybe it would scandalize my parents to see something in the album artwork. I think of like the back cover to Sublime, self-titled, having
yeah.
a scandalous positioning on it or something like that. I might just redo the back cover with the track listing with all of the credits intact, but just remove the part that I didn't like.
Okay. Love that.
Or Green Day Dookie or something like that. There was a lot of profanity inside the artwork, so maybe I'll just make my own cover of that kind of thing. And this is like it's an instinct that you just sort of are born with or you're not, to go to that level. And what I learned very quickly was that side of me didn't need to be the thing I led with. So I wasn't going to introduce myself in high school as the kid who had the crazy CD binder who was super obsessive about music. I was just Jay. That was what I was called. Just Jay who plays in a band. And he loves music. And the way that if you really want to know about how much he loves music, you can ask him, but I wouldn't recommend it.
He'll pull out the binder and you'll be sitting there for a while. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's the best way I can say it. It wasn't just the music that I was hearing and that I loved it. It was that there was this whole story that I could align myself to about these people in my head, and the posters that I've kept from those era days that are signed by all the bands I still have. They're laminated now at Office Depot of Goaty Hook, sitting on the stairs at the Capitol in front of the Sumo Surprise, full-length poster with Adam Neubauer's like hand-drawn cartoon on the actual poster art. And all these things sort of don't mean a lot to most people, and that's okay. I'm not asking for everybody to think it's important. I'm just going to present the story in a way that feels like the 5% of people who it was that important to are really going to appreciate this. If I make that my measurement of what I'm presenting and putting out into the world, I feel good about it. And I also think that the casual, indifferent vinyl record fan who doesn't even spin the record once, I think, honestly, this is going to be a shocking fact. Not really. You go to Urban Outfitters, you go to a Target, you go to any of these places that are selling vinyl records, 90% of those folks buying those records are never going to put it on a turntable or even listen to it. It's just a art keepsake. And that's kind of cool. That's what CDs were for. And that's why most people threw away, when they got a CD binder, the jewel cases and the liner notes. They just put the CD in the slot and they're like, dude, I'm all good. My whole CD slot is stuffed. In fact, the reason that my CD binders fell apart most of the time is because there wasn't enough strength in the plastic holding the CDs in, and they would just pop loose because I'd have so much crap put in there. Guitar picks. If I saw a band and I got a guitar pick, I'd put it inside the CD booklet, with everything else. So it's, I don't know how to describe it. I wouldn't say it's like OCD or obsessive. It's just the way that I found joy. It's like people who memorize trading card sports statistics. They love their favorite baseball players, but do they really love them or do they love them?
Right. Or, I mean, it's like collecting VHS, that you're going to like obsessively make sure that all of them are alphabetized by genre. And you have a giant 1,000 cell spreadsheet of all of the movies and what year they came out. It's like, we all are a little obsessive about the things.
I've been doing that with my DVDs, with my VHS, with my movies, with my baseball cards forever. And it's just the way that I unwind. It's just a way I relax. It's like peaceful to me to organize and catalog and memorize things that don't matter.
Yeah. Dude, I get it. This always happens to me. My wife gets so mad because like when we get on like when we're doing like spring cleaning or something, and she's like mopping the floors and cleaning the kitchen, and I'm like, yes, okay, we're cleaning. I love this. I'm gonna reorganize my entire movie collection and digitize, like make sure I have all. And she's like, this is not cleaning.
It's not cleaning.
No, but it is. I'm cleaning it up.
Dude, I've been with my wife for I've been with her for 22 years now, and she's always saying, don't get sidetracked. We're going to do house cleaning day. Don't get sidetracked. That's exactly what she means.
Like, there's a lot of cleaning down in the basement with the vinyl, I think, that needs to happen. That's what you're saying.
Totally. I don't know if that helps answer your question or not. But
no, that's great. I love that. Yeah. No, I appreciate that because I was also the booklet guy that was going through the booklets and like looking at who the band thanked and like who like mastered, or I love looking at their publishing names, because like sometimes you get some funny ones in there, people just having funny publishing names, which I think is great.
I'm also of the belief that that is not an instinct that is lost or generation specific. It's not because we were from a certain era that we have that instinct or proclivity to do that. I think it's a born trait that can be taught and cultivated to younger people.
For sure. Well, we honestly, like, yeah, we found that we have a friend of the show, Dawson Westfall. We actually just recorded an episode with him. He's 19, and he came to us with a bunch of like research notes for albums and stuff, and he is very much of that same mindset. And it was wild to me at first to be like, oh, you're just like a kid, and you relate to this the same way that we do. So yeah, it's fun finding our people across generations.
It would definitely be like in youth group in the 90s, in middle school. All my youth group leaders were in their early 20s, so they all went to high school in the like mid 80s, and toe to toe, no questions asked. Every single one of them would be like, Jason knows more about 80s music trivia than I do.
Yeah.
There's no question. He didn't even live through it
right
in a meaningful way, but he just knows and rattle it off. And that's just, I wish my brain were primed for more useful, world changing sort of
I get it.
efforts, but this is what I'm stuck with. So
yeah,
I mean, I would argue that you're making definitely some impact out there. So
appreciate
it's
that.
the people like you, that we need more of.
I think to state it as being significant and important with or without anybody's approval, to the point where you're willing to actually go put your money where your mouth is and work on it and put it out in the world and do something about it rather than just jaw on about it on social media, is a little bit of the difference in terms of what I'm trying to do versus what I think a lot of other super fans of this era of music like to do. It's like you guys are out there talking about it and saying, does it mean something in 2025? Whereas most people are just saying, you know what I'd love to do more than anything, man? Just go back to like 96, pre-Ska's explosion, and just live through that whole thing all over again, man. Just if only.
Right. No, there's definitely something to be said about like being proactive about it and just like, leading the charge of trying to find like-minded people.
We're doing this Tooth and Nail box set that's coming out, and it's a celebration of the earliest era of Tooth and Nail. And we're going to get a lot of people who are going to go online and just think that they know better and could have done a better job with it themselves. If it were up to them, they would have chosen this record, or they would have made this record available for sale separately. And to them, I say, I have thought about this way harder and way longer and worked my butt off way more than you have.
Yeah, right.
Or ever will. So talk to me when you've established the credibility and done the work, and really 3 years of research of my life has gone into this thing. And for them to just be pissed that they couldn't buy the Focus record like as a standalone.
Yeah.
I don't care. It doesn't even matter to me.
Dude, I get it. I mean, it's like it's a similar thing to like when you see like movie adaptations of books and people get so pissed. They're just like, "Whoa, it was nothing like the book." And it's like, "Well, yeah, no, but this person spent like probably their entire life growing up with this book and then made the movie that they wanted to make." I don't know. I appreciate hearing that.
I saw like Chris Columbus talk about Harry Potter, and somebody was railing him for Peeves not being in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone or whatever, the Philosopher's Stone. He's like, why didn't you put Peeves in there? He plays such a pivotal role in some of the sneaking around. And Chris Columbus is like, because Peeves is obnoxious, and I didn't want to deal with an obnoxious character.
Yeah,
it's an obnoxious character. So good.
So I mean, it's the same thing. Yeah, put your money where your mouth is. Like if it means that much to you, then you can also do the work. I get it.
Yeah, they spend a disproportionate amount of time complaining about things they would do differently, and especially in Original Vinyl's case. And I would just prefer them to be grateful that any of it exists. That's what I am.
Yeah,
I can't.
We are too.
I can't believe any of this stuff is getting pressed. I wanted it so bad for so many years. And then finally I was just like, I guess I got to just go do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I get that. I totally get that. Josh, you look like you had a question.
Oh, no, I was just going to say I'm excited for the She's the Queen, for the first time on vinyl,
Yeah,
It's
and
fun.
people think and want that in their minds as a completist for Starflyer 59, but I would defy most Starflyer fans to have the instant recollection of the last time they listened to that record just sonically, because it's a slog, man. It's a lot of this guy trying to find his way in the world. He's not the artist Starflyer 59 who we think of when we think of classic Starflyer 59. I think people assume that because it's early Starflyer and it's sort of attributed to this like golden era of
Right.
discovery. But that record is all the hell over the place. You know what I mean? It is not this opus that some genius kind of like thought was a wholly formed idea coming out the gate. It was kind of half baked. There's like a Joy Electric song in the middle of that record.
Yeah.
That's like super strange and out of place. But I had the guy from NPR, Lars Gotrek, write a whole essay about how unique that is and the positioning and what it represents within the culture of not just Tooth and Nail, but that middle part of the 90s where everyone's kind of post-grunge trying to figure it out. Is shoegaze going to be a thing? Is electronica going to be a thing? Is down-tempo, is like 50s throwback doo-wop going to be a thing? And the answer is to all of it, yes.
Yeah.
In 94, you know what I mean?
Right.
Just put it all in there.
Yeah, and that's kind of fun. It's okay to talk about those things as if they're not these just golden calves.
Right,
and that
right.
The artists themselves would not talk about them that way.
Dude, and that, that's a big thing with our show too, is meeting this art like where it's at and still like appreciating it for what it is, but also not just like kissing ass to everything that's come before. It's like, okay, yeah, I mean, like we can recognize this for what it is, and maybe it's not great, but that doesn't mean that like it doesn't, something else the artist has done isn't great, but it's just really cool that it's out there. Like, I just love that it exists, and I just want to talk about the fact that it exists.
Right. Something I have to tell the artist before I start working with them about the process of doing these layouts with their collaboration is that I don't care about what happened. And they're like, what do you mean by that? I'm like, let's assume because you and I are talking about putting it out on vinyl, everyone's familiar with what happened to one degree or another. They might have their own conflicting versions of the narrative, but what I'm more interested in telling the story about is the here and now of it. And you said that's Kellen over there to your left or something like that, Josh? Is that his name?
Oh, my son Keller, yeah.
Keller. Yeah, dude. I want Keller to feel like this matters. And if he was to sit and actually read about the artist's statement or something like that, I'd want it to sort of hit on a couple of points of like gratitude about the fandom still caring about it, but also talking about it now and what matters about it now. Not just that it's this like thing that happened way a long time ago. Now it's over and now we'll never get it back.
Right.
But just that it's kind of cool that it might have now been several steps down the ladder of informing the types of music that's popular now.
Right. Yeah.
But it'll come back. There'll be a Joe Christmas revival this year where people are talking about Joe Christmas and they'll, play Furnace Fest and the records will get a reissue. And then all of a sudden people will be like, you know what? I miss jangly guitars. I'm going to go out and start my own jangly guitar rock band.
Right. Yeah.
It could be a 50-year-old guy saying that, or it could be Keller saying that. It doesn't really matter. I want him to hear it and think that it's inspiring now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Dude, I love that.
Hey Jammers, this is Josh here. Just wanted to jump in and talk about our sponsor for today's episode, which is, of course, colliderecords.com. And we're talking about the album A Course of Obliteration by The Showdown for its 20th anniversary. And in conjunction with its 20th anniversary, it was pressed to vinyl for the first time ever. One of the variants quickly sold out, but there is a sundown variant available at colliderecords.com. It's a double LP. It looks great. You can own this record for the first time ever on vinyl. And what's even better is that we can give you a little promo code to bring down the price a little bit. If you use the promo code ChurchJamsNow, all one word at checkout, that will give you 20% off your first purchase at Collide Records. And I'm looking at their store right now, and they also have the collector's editions of Backbreaker and Blood in the Gears, which the Showdown released recently, which is cool. Getting a little CD deluxe collector's edition back in the mix in the 2020s. CDs are coming back, and Collide has them. So jump on over to colliderecords.com, use our promo code ChurchJams now, get the Showdowns, A Course of Obliteration on vinyl, some of their CDs, and check out all the rest of the stuff that they have in stock. I'm sure you'll find a lot to enjoy and spin. So with that, like when you're working with the artists, and I know specifically I'm thinking of like the inserts that you'll put in like the artist essays and like the retrospectives, whatever. Have you had to kind of like coach them and like edit that a little bit to be like, well, I think you should go at it from like this angle for like either the essay that you're writing or I guess what you're pitching,
every time it's been pretty doctored by me. In fact, I have sort of this speech communication major brain ways to summarize things at this point that sound like sometimes maybe not the right vocabulary for the person who's actually talking. So every essay you see has been sort of informed and collaboratively written by me. And some of them are so extreme that the artist themselves is like, I don't even want to put my name on this without your name next to it because I would never have thought to say it that way. And in some cases they write it in such a way that is, I'll use As Cities Burn as a good example. Recently, we marketed and sold the As Cities Burn Hell or High Water reissue when we announced it through social media. That's it. We announced that as having an essay featuring Aaron Lunsford. And so I coached Aaron on writing the essay. I don't know if you guys know Aaron or are familiar with him.
But we've talked to him.
He tends to have a little bit of a different approach to everyone in life than your standard person. So if you're talking about somebody who likes to be provocative and not always in the best kind of way, that's definitely the position he approached the essay from.
I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, I can't see that from him at all.
That's not the Aaron that I know at all.
It was not good from the fans' perspective. And I had to let him know that, I don't think that they're going to appreciate being cursed at. I know that Capital Christian, who we're licensing it from, is not going to appreciate all this profanity inside the album liner notes.
That's so funny.
And he basically just said, well, F you, if that's your attitude. I'm not going to change my art. I don't care what you think. I don't care what the fans think. This is what I wrote. I'm sticking to it 100%. I'm not changing a dang thing for you.
That's the most fucking Aaron Lunsford thing I've ever heard.
And so I just said, well, now I'm stuck because I've already advertised that there's an essay from As Cities Burn in the liner notes. So I called Cody and I was just like, dude, let's just hit the record button on the phone call. Let's just talk through some questions that I have for you. You obviously don't have the time or ambition to write a thoughtful essay about this, but let me see if I can capture what your sentiment or attitude about the fandom of this album is. And that's effectively what I did. I just wrote what he said, but I just structured it out of sequence in a way that
makes sense in like an essay form. Yeah.
Yeah. I just hope it's his words, but it's just said in order. And most of the time, these people do not think in order. They think about, this crazy memory just popped into my head where I was like, in 1994, and I heard Green Day Dookie, and then I saw the Woodstock performance, but then later on I saw American Idiot at Broadway, and Broadway, like American Idiot, the play was not very good, but then, hey, what were we talking about again? The Offspring? What?
Right.
That's how most of these artists, especially the ones who did a significant amount of drugs, that's a thing that I have to reckon with as people who were particularly heavy on the usage, having any kind of useful thing to say.
Right.
At all.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Trying to approach somebody where they're at in this sort of relationship way is the most important piece of what I do. It's approaching them at their speed, at their pace, not sounding like an academic, not sounding like a person who's a super fan, not sounding like somebody who's interested in making money off of their fame, but just saying, I do have a finger on the pulse of what the fans would appreciate about you in 2025. Let's tell that story.
I love that.
And if they're down for it, great. And if they're not, and I've met plenty who are not down for that cause, they just want to do their thing and they want to do it their way. And I let them kind of seal their own fate.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's not your job to represent them in that aspect,
When it's like somebody who nobody's been talking about for 20 years and they have this now sudden profound sense of entitlement to tell their FU story to everybody.
Ooh. Oh, buddy,
It's
we've
wild.
had so many of those kinds of interviews. Yes,
I
I'm
know this is
fully aware.
this is their moment to
Yeah.
drop some knowledge on you about their goings on in the CD
Uh-huh.
industry. It's not that, dude. It's not that scandalous. It's not that
Right.
impossible to unpack. It's a bunch of people who had no other means and resources other than to not go to college and not get a job, and they wanted to go out and see the world. This is the best way that they possibly could, but they're now talking about it from the same position. When they get back into that headspace, they're
Yeah.
18 again, and they're
Right.
talking
Yes.
about it like an 18-year-old talks about things.
Yep. For
So,
sure. I
Yeah.
totally get that.
It's interesting on the flip side of that. Like for artists, I think of Josh Scoggin, who don't seem as interested in like, oh, what I did with Norma Jean and with the Chariot anymore. I'm doing 68 now, like, because he's like, I'm not doing a Chariot reunion for Furnace Fest, even though everyone would love it, kind of thing. But like whenever the Bless the Martyr and the Wars albums came out, and there's like, especially on the Wars one, which I have, has like just that lengthy essay that I was like, this is so good. Like it honestly surprised me. I was like, wow, I'm surprised that he wanted to kind of, because he seems like a very forward.
I coached him into
guy.
a lot of that.
Okay.
It was a lot of conversations with the guy about my intention. And when he and I finally like clicked into place from the vibe standpoint, where he was just like, oh, this guy Jason's not a super fan. In fact, he doesn't listen to my music at all. But he's an admirer of art for art's sake. I do that with Josh from Showbread. I did that with Jeff from 90 Pound Wuss. These are all the same type of person. I've figured out what their love language is in communication. And art for art's sake is the highest order and the highest thing in their minds that matters, as opposed to people who think that fame or writing the perfect song or telling the right story. All of those things are of supreme importance. There are people who just believe in the purity of art, and that has to come to them new and fresh constantly. They rarely look back. They celebrate the person that they are in the mirror today, and they are the least self-conscious people you'll ever meet. And that's kind of a gift. And if you tell them that, all of a sudden you're like clicking with them. You say, it must be nice to not be so self-conscious, that you're always looking forward to the next art project you want to make, even if it's going to be for you and one other person and nobody else in the world ever hears it. I admire the instinct. When you tell them that, they're like, yeah, you get me. Okay, cool.
You get it.
While we're on the subject, I might as well write something about the Chariot. Cool. I'll just write this like 2,500 word essay.
I know. It's a long one.
So it's more psychology than it is like, and just vibing with people. I've traveled the whole country so many times now, and I get dropped into a new environment where I get in a car with a complete stranger and I spend the whole day with them. And my assignment is to go out and sell with them oftentimes in my regular profession. And to do that, you have to get some sort of like thing you're vibing and clicking with people on fast. It has to happen like you and I are doing in the first 27 minutes of our conversation. You have to be like, oh, I kind of get that guy. I get where he's coming from. And I'll align to his values or he'll align to mine, and we'll move forward together.
Yeah.
So.
I get it. I mean, I spent like most of my career in service industry, and it's like it's a similar kind of thing. It's like you can kind of like instantly clock where someone's at, and then you kind of meet them at that place, and then you enjoy your time together, and then you're done. And I think that's a skill. Potentially, I think more people should attempt to develop that skill. I think we'd all probably communicate a little bit better if we could.
Yeah, I study that still to this day all the time. Just interpersonal communication. I'll watch guys like Vin Gang online who are just all about good communication and removing the edifice of being self-conscious. And I have to do that when I approach an artist. I have to talk to them from that position where I'm not self-conscious, because that's the one thing that I think fandom usually creates a separate barrier between you and the person you're admiring, is you suddenly feel self-conscious being in the room with somebody who you've seen on TV, or you've celebrated their music discography for years and years. And now you have the opportunity to say everything you've ever had the chance to say to them, and it comes out instead. Yeah. So I don't have that self-conscious entry point with the artists that I'm working with. And I I think on some level, they've been spending the last 20 years not thinking they're a big deal, not thinking that the band that they were in was a big deal. And they're happy if they meet somebody who thinks it's great. But if they meet somebody who's like gushing and you're like a 45-year-old dude talking to another 40-year-old dude, you're like,
right,
what?
right.
What?
Right.
Was that something you had to work through at all, like in your younger years? Like, did you ever have that, like when you were a teenager, or
No, I was just born without it. I was born without guile or the ability, like, you know what I mean? I was just an odd duck. I was the homecoming king of my high school of like 1,400 people. And I just didn't feel, and that wasn't because I was like really great at sports or I was like Mr. Popular. I was just friendly and sociable with everybody.
Yeah.
And everybody was on an equal playing field. And turns out when you're going for like being the homecoming king or something like that, 3/4 of the entire school are actually not in your grade. And you just have to convince those 3/4 that you're
Right.
thoughtful of them. And that's a cool feeling when you're a freshman, like some senior class person comes up to you, is like, hey, tell me your story, dude.
Yeah.
So I was just like that and curious about the bands that I admired or the people younger than me. It didn't matter. There was no like sense of, hey, I'm an upperclassman now, so all bets are off.
No, I love that. Like just the ability to connect with people where they're at. I think is super important, and I think that's based on what I've seen from Unoriginal Vinyl and sort of the responses both from artists and from fans and stuff. That seems like it's a little bit of like a superpower for you.
It's 80% of their story is not what I'm interested in. So it's not really the music. It's not really the best song they ever wrote and the moment that they had in the studio with Aaron Sprinkle. That was like the game-changing moment.
Yeah.
If that changed who they were and their DNA on some level, I think that's a cool story to tell because we all have those moments where we have something sort of change our composure, set us askew a little bit to the point where now we're off in a new direction. And certainly artists have that more than most people do because they'll make albums that all sonically sound completely different. There's a lot of bands like that are kind of like that I work with that are great examples of constantly changing, constantly growing, constantly reinventing themselves. And that's the sort of human side that the fans want to read about now. They don't want to just hear, how did you write the song? You know, the moon is down. How did you do that?
Exactly. No, that's our entire ethos when we interview artists too. It's like, you know, at this point, there are enough podcasts, there are enough blogs and things like that have asked everyone, like, what's your favorite touring story? Or like, what does this song mean? It's like, no, we want to get into like who you are as a person and why you do what you do. And then also talk like specific, like,
yeah, but also tell me about that moment with Aaron Sprinkle in the studio.
Right. We also talk about very specific music nerd stuff.
Yeah.
So,
totally.
no,
I like that. I like that too. I wrote like a super, super long form interview out with Indie Vision Music.
Mm-hmm.
Emphasis on long form.
Totally, man. I think that I knew that was not going to be for 99% of even a very niche audience. Like the people who even go to that site anymore, who talk about and celebrate these things, they're not caring what Unoriginal Vinyl's backstory is or what he's up to. Right. But to that 1% of people who are like going to slog through it, I hope they get some like feeling at the end of it of, I'm like this person. This person makes me feel less alone in the world because there's more people out there like
those
me.
are the people that go to Indie Vision Music, I feel like.
I would hope so, but maybe they're not. I don't know. It's a weird world, but I wanted to throw it out there ultimately because I just knew that Brandon had a really terrible year. His wife died. It was a really tragic, horrible scene for him. I wanted something that would just make him smile a little bit. And to write it in such a way that would guarantee more view counts, more time spent on his website, thus increasing his ability to promote and traffic his website in such a way like that stuff's all algorithm, man. That stuff's not like if I had just written the quick version of it and said, hey man, thanks so much. We've been around since 2017-ish and we put out a lot of records. We're really thankful. Thanks to you for and all the fans. That's it.
Right.
I wanted people to like go away as if they had consumed a meal and they're a little exhausted from it. You know?
Right. Well, I mean, I will say I can't speak for Josh, but I believe we're part of that quote unquote 1%. That's like exactly the kind of stuff we like.
You are that because you're
digging
literally
into.
out there practicing doing it yourself. You're out there doing the exercise and doing the reps and doing the stuff with the artists you want to talk to about their stories and doing it probably from a very similar position that I am. Just
Yeah.
lead with empathy, lead with
Right.
gratitude, lead with a position of saying, this may or may not matter. It's okay if ironically that at the end of the day and we all die, it doesn't matter at all. It's okay with us.
Yeah.
I love
Well,
that.
and I mean, it was written for definitely like people like you and people like me. Because like when I read that recently, the point you made about something about the tooth and nail licensing for represses, like how it changed recently. Because I thought like the tooth and nail vinyl was like how just they were doing it, and it was honestly pretty subpar. And then once like you started getting involved, like we got the little robot stamp on there. It's like, oh, things are finally getting like it's a lot better, and things like the
Being
quality
taken
of
seriously.
yes, it is. But so I was like very curious. I was like, oh, that's why. So I was like, I've been giving Tooth and Nail a hard time that they were like phoning in their records from like 2012 to 2015,
Right.
16 or whatever, because I felt like they were subpar. But it's like, oh, that's a very interesting detail that probably no one else cares about for the licensing, but it's interesting.
I was
to me.
literally like, I'm going to just turn my Instagram profile called Unoriginal Vinyl Photo into a brand like overnight. I'm just going to do that in order to save what I perceive to be a scene,
Right.
in
Yeah.
my own small way, the smallest way possible. Just say like, hey, if you see the stamp on the back, that means, okay, somebody who is a fan cares about it. It wasn't allowed to pass inspection without even being,
Right. There's some
about.
quality control to it.
Yeah. And that positioning did not strike Brandon Ebel or Jim at first as being critically important. They're just kind of like, yeah, I mean, we're okay with you working on it. That's fine. Let's see where it goes. They had their reservations because the system was so stacked against them at that point. Universal was
Right.
pressing all the records for them, doing a subpar job. They'd been eviscerated online for some of their pressings, and it was just like they didn't think it could get any worse. So that was the exact moment I could put my foot in the door and say, I know what to do here. I know that there's a separate brand that can be created that just constitutes the better version.
For sure.
I mean, it's basically kind of what they did with the Invisible Creature. Like, even though it was Ryan at Tooth and Nail working, like having that on it, or like artwork done by Invisible Creature, which was in the studio. But I feel like having that stamp, even though it's kind of internal, it still does communicate that value and the care that goes into it.
Yeah, and then the audacity that I would take that mentality over to other labels was the really shocker part of this industry. The industry did not welcome that at all. They're like, no, you're a graphic designer. You do not get to put a brand next to our logo because you're a graphic designer. And I just said, oh, wait, I already did. You know who creates the print files? I create the print files.
I have final send to the print.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry about you.
We didn't do it to be obstinate, and we didn't do it defiantly against certain people. But in the earliest days, we had a lot of people come at us just being like, that's not how things are done. We're releasing this. We're the ones paying for it. We're the ones selling it and distributing it ourselves. You can't just go on there and piggyback onto our stuff. And I said, you guys don't get the full picture of what's happening here.
Right,
where this is going to matter the most is after there are 100 releases that all across different labels and genres and bands and eras of music all have a little bit of something similar about them from a quality standpoint. So
yeah,
ties it all together.
I love that. Okay, so I want to briefly. So I took a look at all of the Unoriginal Vinyl releases, and I figured out which of the albums that we've actually covered on our show. So if you don't mind, I'm going to read those all off, and then maybe we can, if there's anything about the process of any of those records that stands out to you, maybe we can jump into that. So we have The Question and The Week's End by Emery, Until the Shakes Apart, Five Iron Frenzy, Bless the Martyr, Norma Jean, I Am Hollywood, He Is Legend, Southern Weather by The Almost, Attack of the Wolf King by Haste the Day, Hell or High Water by Acidy's Burn, A Chorus of Obliteration by The Showdown, No Sir Nihilism is Not Practical by Showbread, and then we're actually recording tonight, Never Take Friendship Personal by Anne Berlin. So if there's, just for our show, people
Why?
that have been listening to us.
Why is it mostly heavy stuff for you guys? What are you drawn to about that?
That's really interesting because I don't see us as like mostly covering heavy
normally,
stuff.
yeah, we really don't. But I feel like there's just between like Bless the Martyr, The Showdown, and Haste the Day. I feel like it seems like it's a little bit skewed. It makes it seem more skewed than it probably
and
is.
Legend. Yeah.
And he's
Were
Legend.
you guys all
true.
born in like 88, 89? Is that why? Because your
90,
era is a little later?
Yeah. We're
That
a
makes
little
sense.
bit younger, so
I get it. Okay. That
but
checks out.
it's just it's I mean the second you start pressing Small Town Poets, then we can have another conversation about that because we've covered them too.
I think I mentioned them recently on some sort of interview that I'd be interested in that. Is that Derek Webb? Or is that Caedmon's?
That Caedmon's Call.
That's Caedmon's, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Oh my God. Actually, Derek Webb just posted something today, I think, on Twitter. He's like, yeah, we just, our documentary premiered and we overheard this conversation in the airport where someone was like, oh, hey, they're in a Christian band. Oh, yeah. What band are they from? And they said Jars of Clay. And I think that's very funny. So
that's awesome. Five Iron was really awesome because I totally revamped their entire vision for that record and turned it into something hopeful. It was like coming out on the heels of the pandemic, kind of written remotely. And it was all about fear and panic and just negativity. And Reese was going through a really, I think, challenging time in his personal life. And he was taking a lot of that anger and pointing it in certain directions. You know what I mean? Pointing it at the right, pointing it at the BLM movement, in favor of the BLM movement. And there was a lot of things that were really polarizing about the positioning that he was coming at it from. And the original artwork that they sent to me was this riot that happened in Seattle. And it was a lot of just fierce, angry protesters coming toe to toe with folks like in a SWAT team riot gear. Like kind of like the song, if you know the song, Go and Get Your Riot Gear, it's basically like the visual equivalent of that. And I was basically just like, guys, what do you want the story to be here? They couldn't agree amongst themselves what they wanted that story to look like because Reese was in such a really polarizing position at that moment. And I just said, like, let's think about your song Dandelions, for example, and what that song is about. It's about somebody who goes and basically decimates their own life multiple times and then finds hope and redemption throughout it all and is this sort of like optimist despite the circumstances. And is there any part of you that can find a dandelion in the weeds of this like scorched earth you're writing about and until this shakes apart? And Reese's feedback to me was like, no, there's nothing redeeming about any of this right now.
All right. Wow.
And I'm like, okay, well then I'm just going to have to go on a limb and through sort of like faith, assume that I can visualize this in a way that has meaning and impact to him. Right. So I like came up with this. He had this other idea where it was just like a protester outside of a liquor store who had just burned down a liquor store. It's this image of a guy with like a gas can and Minnehaha liquor in Minneapolis just being set on fire, basically. And he's like, I want that to be my cover. And I'll just make these big, bold, in-your-face, ostentatious letters that say, until this shakes apart. And I'm like, okay, so let me ask you this. What happens after the building burns down? He's like, I don't know. I don't care. Like, well, there's going to be an afterthought to all of this. There's going to be a world where through the embers, the first thing that grows out of those is actually weeds. Do you remember anything about weeds? Do you remember anything about seeing flowers in these weeds? Like, let's just try to
let's think
eventually
about that.
In time, weeds can turn out to be these like completely beautiful invasive flowers. You know what I mean? Columbines are the state flower of Colorado, so they're a super invasive flower. They're super invasive. They basically can go in and destroy all other plant life all around them because they're so powerful. And I like the message there quite a bit. I was really happy with visually sort of showing a 3-panel and doing reversible jackets and things like that would each basically be representative of a person in a different phase of the grieving process or the anger process. Like eventually you're going to have to work through your anger. Eventually you're going to have to get to a point where you start to think about restoration. If it's somebody who you burned a bridge with, and you've scorched that relationship, you may not ever have healing with that person, but you may be able to take the lessons that you've gleaned from it and apply them to healing in another relationship or another area. And eventually you'll have this beautiful field full of flowers that is birthed out of that tragedy or horrible story. I hope. I hope it just doesn't continue to be tragedy upon tragedy upon tragedy. I think that the Fire Iron Frenzy fans resonate with that message that hope still flies and that there's flowers in these weeds and all these kinds of things. But I had to just do it very simply without any words visually. So if you look at the packaging, it's like a 3-panel packaging and there's no words anywhere on there. It's just showing these simple ideas of like a dandelion growing out of embers and then a beautiful mountain scene of columbines. I was really happy about that one.
Yeah.
I was really happy. I was really happy about Showbread, No Sir Nihilism. I had a lot of people, including guys that now work for me at Unoriginal Vinyl. This guy, Mike Party in Canada, really wanted Showbread, No Sir Nihilism so badly. And he was a vocal person amongst a sea of Unoriginal Vinyl photo people that was in my community before I started the brand in earnest, that just said that album's really, really, really important. And I kept saying, but why is it really important?
You were right, Mike.
Yeah. And then he's like, give it more time, give it a little bit more of a closer listen. Think about some of the ideas that in the mid 2000s, while Anne Boleyn is out there crooning and looking pretty and touring with Motion City Soundtrack during Never Take Friendship Personal, there's this band out there that's aping that whole culture.
Right.
They're doing it in a way that sonically sounds like Refused, like maybe a little too close to Refused.
Well,
but
yeah, that was something that Josh Porter confirmed with us as well.
There's nothing really wrong with that. I think that's kind of fun, honestly, but I am like, okay, I'll go deeper, a couple layers deeper and things like that. And these guys are now reminding me a lot of 90 Pound Wuss and a lot of the confrontational post rock, a lot of people in the noise scene who just truly are originals in every sense of the word. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's like on such a degree that they're on the spectrum that they don't even see how abnormal they're being in the midst of all of it. Dawson Scholes from Ongoing Concept is very much the same way. Like, these guys don't play by the rules, and that's really sexy. That's really admirable, and that's really not going to sell a lot of records. But 20 years after the fact, those are the records people are going to be talking about as having an impact in disrupting the norm and literally going against the grain with it. There were people who reminded me of Showbread, and I at first lumped Showbread in with the Family Force 5 of it all. The people who were all wearing matching outfits and trying to be super flashy and super, like art rocky, but kind of also parodying art rock and parodying. They're like cosplaying a scene band in a way.
Right.
But the second Age of Reptiles came out, and then especially once Anorexia came out, I was like, oh, these guys are on their own shit right now.
Yeah.
They're operating on their own wavelength, and this is not for any of us. This is for the simple, deep down impulse to get it off his chest. Like, it's got to, sometimes these people just have to vomit out their truth, and that truth is spoken through art. And it's not certainly something that the labels ever appreciate. They actually hate it when a band does the about face or turns on their fan base multiple times, and you can see why. They spend tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars promoting the band as a rock, if you like, fill in the blank. And then all of a sudden, they've got to contend with a double album about a person, with an eating disorder.
Double concept album. Yeah.
So those people will always exist. I actually appreciate about the Christian scene that it enabled for some of that to exist, more so than anything on the commercial landscape that we were used to. You think about the punk rock of Epitaph or Fat Wreck or any of the stuff that I was also coming up with that was on a parallel track. There weren't these artists that were in that space of being able to make pure art for art's sake. They just didn't. It wasn't. The other people were either too smart or too cautious to enable a band like that to exist. But Brandon at Tooth and Nail gave that band an opportunity amongst be without you amongst a lot of these other people who would be on a spectrum of not normal that is so severe that we would call it dangerous. You know?
Yeah, dude, I love that. All right. I know we're coming up at the end of our time, so I know Josh probably has some sort of devastating question that he's gonna end
devastating.
with.
No, it's really nerdy. I don't know. Do we have time for one or two questions? And then I also have something I want to mention at the
I'm fine, whatever you do.
Two questions and a mention, my man.
2 questions and a mention. Okay, cool. Well, I'm just curious about like how many projects you juggle at one time. Like how many irons are in the fire at any particular time, or on average for you that you're like working between?
Probably 10. I'd say
10.
that's a fair, nice round number. There's always 10 things happening. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 right down.
Okay, a little bit more than
between
usual.
10 to 12.
Okay, gotcha.
All right.
It's all very organized. It's all very like pitch deck. It's all very presented in a way that is completely digestible to the artist and the label. So they have an idea of exactly where we are in the process and how far along before we can hit order or submit.
What is your? Sorry, I'm going to jump in, Josh. What is your timeline typically between like either you pitching to an artist or like an artist coming to you versus when you have like the finished sort of pitch deck of what you're going to do?
It's 3 months usually about.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. 3 months start to finish. I'm just like ramping everything up, and then they can count on basically another 3 months before they have the product in hand.
Okay. So it like
quick.
Typically about 6 months total. That's wild.
Half a year. Yeah. Okay. So like we were really, really holding out super hardcore for Slick Shoes and Dogwood to say yes to Furnace Fest. We were getting really down to the wire because they weren't saying yes until like July. And so we were like, we have you guys staged and poised to be the releases this year for Furnace Fest, but you have to say yes.
Yeah.
And you have to come to terms and negotiate your deal with Furnace Fest or whatever. But if you do, you're going to have this added bump of exposure and visibility through this vinyl release that we're going to do. First time on vinyl for Dogwood ever. You know what I mean? And so that was actually a deciding factor for them to push them over the edge for both of them.
Oh, cool.
Wow. That's a lot to coordinate too. Like, please.
I don't have to do it that way. Like festival, I could just say it's none of my business. You guys do whatever the hell you want. But
right. Yeah.
I wanted it to exist. I wanted to
and tying it into the whole like Furnace Fest exclusive day 1, day 2 kind of thing. Like that's
I'm really proud of that whole series' uniqueness. Everything represents a unique point in time. It's not just all genre specific to hardcore. Right. It's not all genre specific to punk rock. It's all over the map. It's like all of our experiences growing up in youth group culture.
Right. Love that. All right, Josh, what else you got?
My other question is when are the Starflight records coming out? The other ones, because
the other ones,
Troy Glessner told us about them like 2 years ago at this point, and I haven't seen anything. So
it's been a work in progress for literally that long. It's come down to, quite frankly, this "she's the queen" thing and trying to negotiate whether or not it's felt like the right thing for Jason to believe in the model of rising tide raises all ships. So for Jason to understand that he could go out there and release it himself and put it out into the world as a celebration of just Starflyer fans, or can he remember a time in his life where he was so busy within the scene and so involved within the scene that like a weekend consisted of going to see Blenderhead, Focused, Wish for Eden, all in a weekend time, and everybody was like breaking bread together. And that's the intention behind this box set. It's not every release in order from the very first Tooth and Nail release ever. It's these people all were within community and still have relationships to each other and ties to the Christian music scene in a meaningful, contributive way. They're not just getting online to talk crap about everything. They're actually contributing positively. Brian Gray from The Blame, Billy Power has done the Urban Achiever podcast for a lot of years. And all these guys have like a story to tell, maybe besides Rob Walker, who nobody's heard from and was even aware if he's alive for the last like 10 years. The first artist from Tooth and Nail ever in the history of Tooth and Nail. Like Brandon hadn't talked to him in 25 plus years. So for me to get to reunite those two on screen together with The Rumors Are True with Jeremy in a podcast format that nobody will ever hear, and just take the interview notes and turn them into an essay, an actual interview that's written word that you have to have exclusive. Like it's like meant to be part of the experience. But regardless, what was your question?
Oh, when are the other ones coming out?
Yeah. Now that I think this is coming out, I think this could be our year. There's
Uh,
him and his brand is with Velvet Blue Music and
that's what I
everything
didn't
like
know
that.
if it was if you're having to
We're
work with
trying,
Jeff and
yeah,
whatnot. Yeah.
we're trying to do a rising tide raises all ships thing there too, where what Jeff doesn't have is 150,000, 100,000 people on a mailing list that exposes, that is
Right.
not part of social media, that is
For
not
sure.
like, there's a whole marketing arm that Tooth and Nail still taps into that is way, way more robust and will get way more eyes on the name Starflyer 59 if we collaborate all together. And that's
Yeah,
always my
for sure.
ambition is, can we all collaborate together? I think now Brandon and Jason are talking enough where it's like, yeah, it's cool. Let's make it happen. But
That's
I'm not
awesome.
saying you heard it here first. I'm saying it's taken 3 years to get to this point. There's still
Right.
more to go. There's still more hurdles to overcome, but it's always been our ambition to get all that Starflyer stuff put out because it's great. It's really, really, you want to talk about guys who have high integrity and a high commitment level to their own art for their own reasons. Jason Martin is the king of all that stuff,
Right,
way
yeah.
before his time in terms of, people celebrate the work and the prolific nature of guys like Aaron Weiss and Me Without You. But Jason was the original cat out there really doing it in earnest
100%.
and does not care at all what I think of him or what you think of him or
Right.
what anyone thinks of him.
Yeah.
He's making lullaby records right now.
Right. Yeah.
No, so much so. Have you gotten any like artists like essays from him, or is he just like, I don't care, just put it out? Like, it's hard for me to imagine him getting like writing anything about it.
Right.
No, that's why I went with NPR. I asked, obviously.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, Lars is good for it.
Yeah. No,
He
Lars
doesn't
is
have
definitely good for it.
He didn't have the perspective. Jason didn't have the perspective of his own meaning and worth to the outside world that other people might.
Yeah. He's just like pretty insulated, just doing his
he's
own
just
thing.
like Josh Scogin. He's just like any of these other guys.
Yeah.
Josh Porter. They're all just moving ahead, man. They're not looking back. They're moving ahead. And those guys, I think I have the most admiration for in the entire world, because the moment that they're laying on their deathbed, the thing that they're going to say coming out of their mouth is, I can't wait for what's next. They're not sitting there regretting or fearing or dreading, or they're just always about the next thing, looking forward to it with excitement and nervous, but also positive energy, because that's the way they've lived their entire life. They look forward to the next thing. That's a cool place to be.
For sure.
That is.
All right, guys. I think we're about.
I have my mention still.
Oh yeah.
I have one mention. Yes.
us your mention.
It's quick. I did just want to tell you that I stole one of your ideas. And I think I heard this on one of your interviews with the Black Sheep podcast, where you're talking about your vinyl stamping idea, where you like stamp your records or whatever.
Yeah.
And I took that and I'm modifying it a little bit to where I have like my Discogs collection, and then I have like columns to where I am like writing where I got this piece of physical media from, and then like why it's important to me, so that years later, hopefully my kids and or grandkids will have that to be like, oh, Grandpa had all these records and CDs, and like I don't know these bands, but at least like they'll have that, and like hopefully by that time it'll be written out. But it's like I love that idea that you had of like stamping when you're listening to things, so that people down the line can have.
And I always write on the back. of
Yeah.
those cards exactly what the story is behind that record. It might not be where I got it, but it might be something that's significant to me. Like I'm rolling around on the floor wrestling my daughter and she sticks.
Right.
Dude, I can't ever go back. Like now, every time I pull that record out and I look at the back and I read that, I put that record on, I feel 1,000 times better than I do before putting that record on. And to that point, it's like, let's think about the world that Discogs doesn't exist anymore. Make sure you just print those things. Like take your written notes that you're adding to it, print them, slip them in the jacket, because that profile you've got in Discogs or whatever, if you keel over tomorrow, people might not know, other than listening to this podcast, that we're doing that the whole time. So tie it to something physical. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Love that.
No, I love that and making it, because then it's not just a record that like, oh yeah, it's just a record that he had or whatever. It's like then it has so much more meaning, and the meaning that you had with that piece of media, that music, is then passed on to, or more easier passed on to other people.
Well, it's just a way for them to psychologically, like my daughter gets to now put herself back in daddy's loving wrestling arms as a 6-year-old every time she finds that record and looks at the card on the back, and I told that story.
Right.
So a way of passing on the things. And I would hope one day that she looks at the whole Unoriginal Vinyl shelf and gets a wild impulse to just open one of them up and read somebody else's impactful story.
Yeah.
I hope so.
Yeah,
I
love that.
We'll
so I just wanted to,
I like that.
I just wanted to share that I thought it was a great idea, and I'm implementing it in my own life as well.
I've had a lot of people say that recently. They're just like, yeah, do you stamp all your records like a library? I'm like, yeah. They're like, dude, I'm doing that right now. Great, good.
It's the new thing.
That.
Yeah.
Thanks, Church Jams now, guys. I appreciate it. I hope.
Of course. Thank you so much for being on the show. Is there anything that you would like our listeners to know, to follow you anywhere, anything before we head out?
No, I just think that, like, be generous to each other. Be disproportionately kind in your assumptions about why I'm doing things, rather than get online and just talk infinite amounts of trash about what you think you would do better. If you were given the opportunity, know that there's a guy like me who was only given the opportunity because I appreciated and approached things with the right mindset. When you do that with a little bit of empathy, a little bit of emotional IQ, and a little bit less of your own agenda, you're probably going to get farther in life than being known as the guy who did nothing but just talk trash about something because it wasn't your own preferred version of what you would have done.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why that's an instinct now for these guys who are getting older from youth group culture to start to say, like, what I wanted was this.
Right.
I don't care.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm the target demo. They should do what I want. Yeah.
Dude, go do it. Then go do it. Go make it.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? I saw this guy who put an ivory line lathe cut record on eBay recently that he handmade himself and made in his own jacket for. Oh, wow. And I was like, totally wrong principle, but kind of a cool,
right? Yeah,
a cool instinct. Like
close.
Those who can't do for others, they do for themselves. Like, you're almost there.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I want ivory line. I feel bad for the idiot who goes and pays $80 for it on eBay, but I'm gonna end up doing it now anyways. But it's just one of those things where you just go, huh, what a funny instinct. But at least they went and tried. Even if they failed, they went and tried.
Yep.
I own MXPX Let It Happen, a bootleg that somebody made recently, or a counterfeit record. Yeah. It sounds great. It looks terrible. I did all the artwork for Let It Happen, and MXPX told me, no, we don't want to do it. We don't like how that record sounds. We had already done all the work for the box set. But the fact that somebody else went out there and did it makes me smile a lot.
Yeah, dude, I get it. I mean, we often say on the show, the only reason that we still exist is that no one told us to stop. So,
that's actually my favorite reason to keep going, is if somebody tells me.
Someone tells.
Keep going even more.
To be fair, I think we have had a couple people at this point tell us to stop, and I'm just like, no, thank you.
Yeah, I've told this on other podcasts and stuff like that, but you and me, we're the same. We're doing it for the same reasons. We feel the same way about this stuff. We have maybe a little bit different way of expressing it. If I do it through design work and you do it through a podcast, or somebody makes a documentary about Squad 5.0, you and me were the same. And we have to find all those ways that we're the same instead of all the ways that I think I would just have done it differently.
For sure.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
Cheers, guys.
All right. I think this is going to be it for us.
Thanks so much, Jason.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being on the show. I'm going to do our little outro real quick. If you like this, we have more nonsense like it at our Patreon at patreon.com/ChurchJamesNowPodcast. And of course, from all of us here at Church James Now, may all your favorite bands stay together, and peace out, motherfuckers.